Welcome back. We have a fabulous panel planned for you this afternoon. It's a corporate panel with talented lawyers representing industries and companies across the country. Many have traveled from out of town, out of state. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to talk about corporate leadership and IP and how to add value, how to lead a corporations. Moderating this powerhouse panel will be Professor Daryl Lim from Penn State Dickinson Law. What can I say about Daryl? He's an internationally renowned scholar, author, and thought leader. He's the Montague Chair in Law at the school and an Associate Dean of Research and Innovation. Our powers have brought us together. Daryl Lim, Esther Lim. Several years ago, my dear partner, Don Dunner, nabs me in the hallway and says, Esther, you have to meet your brother. And Don brought us together and we've been friends and I guess distant siblings since then. So it's my pleasure and an honor to introduce Daryl Lim to moderate this fabulous panel. Welcome, Daryl.
I should add distant siblings, but getting closer every day. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is such an honor to be here at an event which I've heard so much about. One of the things that Don Dunner left us was this legacy of a new friendship. He was the chair of our advisory board when I was at John Marshall, which then became UIC. And we have kept up since. Esther is now serving as advisory board member in our IP and innovation initiative. And we are planning big things, both this year and in the years ahead. Well, I'm going to start by saying this is a fireside chat. So folks in the room, feel free to join in the conversation. I am going to introduce people here on the panel and people on the panel. It is a fireside chat. So as I was saying, just imagine that you are across the table from me with a cup of coffee or, hot chocolate and marshmallows if you're more the hot chocolate kind of person. And we just want to talk about four things really today. The agenda is very simple. And our marching orders from Esther is to talk about leading with IP and adding value to company. So if nothing else, you remember these things, four things: leading with IP and adding value to companies. So we'll talk about leadership. We'll talk about what you do with IP. And when I talk about IP, I mean that broadly know-how, data, privacy, and intersections between these things. We also talk about adding value and what that means in terms of interacting with both folks inside your corporation, but also outside counsel. And then finally, your own corporation. So what is your, if you like, what is the spirit, what is the goal that's driving why you are there? I'll give you an example. I looked up Andy in preparing for this, and he speaks glowingly of Meta and how Meta connects humans in a way that really resonated with who he was as a person. So I think folks in this room and hello to folks online as well would be interested to hear your personal connection with companies, some of whom you just joined, like Andy. Some like Ankur has been there for about 18 years. And I should say that perhaps some a bit longer than that, although I was told I should not say how long. So let's start with leadership. And we'll start with you, Andy, since I was told by Easy that I should not start with her.
Always.
You gave an interview to Corporate Counsel magazine, and you talked about the importance of consistent and clear communication. So tell us a bit more about that and what that means for you in terms of leadership.
Hey, well, thank you for the question. And let me first start by thanking Esther, my new and fast friend, for inviting me to be on the panel. Although I will have to say, we were talking about how well run and curated this conference is, and someone mentioned she saved the best for last. So I'm not sure what it means to be in the dead center of the schedule. It's kind of like getting a B in law school. It's not an A, it's not a C, you know. But nevertheless, really happy to be here. The questions about leadership and the interview I gave with corporate counsel, I'll say one of the things that I'll give you an anecdote. One of the things that I think about all the time, and it's where there's happiness, there's innovation. And there's empirical evidence for that. There's a professor named Amy Claxton at ASU in the early 2000s who was kind of doing some research in the area of happiness and productivity. And what she found was through an experiment, she took about 180 of her students and found that there was a high correlation between their happiness and their ability to ideate. So she went through a number of diagnostic tools to have them level set what they called positive affect, which she deems locus of control. And then asked them to just ideate, give me some ideas. And what she found was the students that were really high on their happiness were also extremely productive in their ideation. And that's all well and good. It's like one experiment, but it was proven again by a professor at University of North Texas, a guy named Mark Davis, who did a meta study, which is just a study about studies. And he found over 70 studies in the last 100 years that when you look at happiness and productivity, there's a correlation. So as a leader, one of the things I'm always thinking about is, where are my happy employees? Because where you find your happy employees are, that's typically where your innovation centers are as well. And most companies do what they call an employee engagement survey, or they use different names, but basically they go to different business units and they ask, hey, how happy are you? Tell us what's going right, what's going wrong. And the data is anonymized, but there is some data that you can get from it, like, you know, how does the accounting department feel? How does the tax department feel? And when you look at that data, you can find, well, I see this group is high. I wonder what they're doing. And you go and you talk to those leaders. And then you start having a conversation with them about things that they're doing, like, oh, well, we implemented a new process that makes things easier for our people. And then the conversation turns into an inventorship discussion. Well, tell me more about that process. Tell me more about what you're doing. And the flip side of that is where employees are not happy, you can ask some questions about what you're doing in that department. You know, are we overlooking people, or are we not getting the production that we need out of them because they're not happy? What can we do to make it better? If your women aren't producing, are the women in your department not happy? If the people of color are not producing innovations, are they not happy? Are they not being seen? So I think that's part of our obligation as leaders, is to think about happiness and productivity together.
Great, thanks. Going down that line, since I'm not supposed to go down this way. Ian, welcome. Ian Florczak, Chief IP Counsel of 3M. Now, Ian, you had mentioned once, not to me, it's public record. She gave an interview too. So she talks about a painting that is in her office of a ship. And there's a quote there that says, a ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about how that informs your leadership style.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and Esther, thank you for inviting me to this conference. I'm just delighted to be here with this quite esteemed panel. That's a where did I see that quote? Say that again. A ship that's in harbor. Say that again.
It's safe.
It's safe.
But that's not what ships are built for.
Yeah, I have that picture on my desk. So it's getting people out there. It's getting our teams out there. One of the things that 3M. So I'll just say this: 3M is a company of 60,000 products. It's got 4 business groups. and we're a conglomerate, industrial conglomerate. One of the things that I really asked my team to do is really get out there and help in the innovation ecosphere. And as you saw during the lunch speech today, we are big in IPO, and we were one of the companies that started with IPO on the innovation diversity ecosystem. And you think a company like 3M would be very ingrained in this, but it took us a lot of courage, I think, for us to really dig into the data, to look at our company. How can we, as in 3M, increase our diversity and innovation? So I grew up in the lab. I started in the lab, and I think back of the years that I was in the lab, I was never an inventor, right? And so I wondered why that was. It's not like I didn't know how to do it. It's just because I didn't really have a lot of role models. Now, I introduced new products, I scaled them up, I brought them to market. 3M made a lot of money on these products, but was never really an inventor. So one of the things we did at 3M in terms of trying to get people out there is to take the courage, to have the courage at 3M to really look into the data. And that requires a lot of permission from HR, but it also requires a lot of leadership from our top leaders to say, yeah, we should really dig into it. It was only at the time with really talking to our chief legal officer and talking to our chief HR officer that says, we really need to dig into the data. And that was, if you believe it, that was kind of unsettling when we got the data to see a company like 3M based on innovation, how much more we had to do. So I think that was one area where we were leaving the safe harbor, asking the hard questions about what our corporation, what our company can do to increase our diversity ecosystem.
Thanks, Yin. So, in the data, like information about the happiness of folks like at Meta. Is there a way to measure morale or
We didn't, so
self-satisfaction?
that's a really good intersection. We did not overlay, like Andrew says, we do annual, even more than annual engagement surveys. We did not overlay those two data. We were very specific about who's inventing within 3M, what is the ethnic makeup, what is the gender makeup. So we didn't, we should do that too, but we didn't overlay that data. I would say 3M is a company that really, as soon as you come in, we teach you about the innovation ecosystem, and even that it missed me, right? So, how do you write? I mean, we have a whole orientation program to help employees, especially R&D employees, to identify inventions and to work into the innovation ecosystem. But we didn't overlay that data. Good suggestion.
Thanks. Anyone else have something to add about leadership?
I would say I'm just very fortunate working at a company like 3M who really, R&D is our DNA. We've got, I don't know how many patents now. We've got over 100,000 patents. That was in 2014. So we really, really believe in innovation and in R&D. I think leadership now, I think it's when we are facing some significant challenges, that everybody is facing challenges in the economy. How do we really focus our employees and be more innovative and really help them to write those invention disclosures? I think what we saw through the pandemic was just although it's an opportunity, we just did see quite of a drop off of our invention disclosures. And so we're working, leaning in, the IP organizations, leaning in with the R&D organization to really focus our invention disclosures.
Well, one thing that Yan is personally leading is the spin-off
Yes.
at 3M, and she's grown up with the organization.
Mhm.
In addition to the IP portfolio and invention disclosures that you just mentioned, you are a leader in the organizational transformation
Yes.
of 3M. So tell us a little bit about being in the center of all this and what some of the takeaways are.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think I didn't think I could come here just because this, when you do a spin, our last spin was 1997. So it's been a long time since we've done a spin. So this spin it's intellectually stimulating, and it's very time consuming. It's really about, so our leaders, our CEO talks about, it's a once in a generation opportunity to really transform yourself. And as you know, when you start saying the word transformation, it just, some people, gravitate towards it, lean into it, others quicken their boots. And so this is an immense time of change for 3M. And it's really exciting time. And it's really, for me, being a leader at this time is really the best I can help people navigate through the change, because there will be, organizational changes. We're not losing. We're spinning off our healthcare business, 25% of our business, right? A nice 25% of our business. The remaining business are very much more focused, but it's really making sure that people understand the change. And it's an immense process that we're going through. I was telling, I don't know if it was you, Daryl, it's kind of exciting because our R&D leaders are really excited about the intellectual property now, right? As we unmask and show them what they have, they're like, wow. And it's exciting to see that they are excited to see, to have the intellectual property. Now we talk about, how do we share and how do we license all of that? That's a little bit trickier, but it's good to see people really, again, re-energize on the intellectual property that we have.
Is that why you were chosen to lead the spin-off, because of the intellectual property involved, or was it because of your leadership skills, something else?
It's part of the IP function within 3M. We do all of our own M&A, especially IP does all the IP due diligence. We don't farm that out. We don't ask outside counsel to do it. It's a way to let in-house counsel really get a diverse set of practices. So that it's a natural of our function to do that. We would not ask outside counsel to step in.
And this question is more to the panel, that is this something that you see as being part of your job description, either now or at some point in the future, as in leading not just the management of intellectual property, acquisition of intellectual property, but really the structural change and transformation of the organization? I don't know why they all looked in your direction. Izu?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I haven't had to lead a spinoff yet, but I'd say on the acquisition piece, we're looking to either make investments in companies that have a big IP portfolio, or for me in my space, a data analytics portfolio, that I'm seeing ourselves and my team, the team that I lead, get more and more involved in that diligence and bringing in those companies and seeing how it fits within our ecosystem at the bank.
Thank you. I should say, Emeagwali, Executive Director, Assistant General Counsel, JP Morgan.
Yes, correct.
Now, following up, because no good deed goes unpunished. You and I talked about the intersection between data, between AI, and how you bring all these different parts together, perhaps in a way that none of these other folks do, just by nature of the business that you are involved in, financial services. What does leadership look like for you in that space?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's a little bit tricky, I'd say, because as I think it was Ian's panel talked about, and the other panel, AI law is evolving, right? And so we have to operate in a space where the laws don't necessarily tell us or haven't been able to show us where our businesses are going. So for instance, if our researchers or data scientists create a product using machine learning or predictive analytics, and that model itself creates the thing that is novel or creates the thing that is creative, then who owns the patent if it's patentable, who owns the copyright if it's copyrightable. So we're leading in a space where someone says we're building the plane as we're flying it, right? We're using our best judgment, not necessarily the law, to advise our clients as they're trying to innovate. So at least in my space, leadership looks like understanding what's out there, using your common sense to figure out where the laws may go so you can properly advise your businesses, and then making sure your business partners trust you with that advice.
Anyone else wants to add something on leadership? Go ahead. Claire. Yeah. Hold on. Claire Desmond, Senior Counsel, IP and Advertising under Armour.
Yes, thank you. I've liked listening to your comments, and I think that I can add a practical nature to leading with IP and leveraging it. It starts with trust. And so I've been at Under Armour for 3 years now, and let me take a step back. Under Armour is a performance apparel brand. And if you've ever, with style, with style, yeah. But if you come to our campus, we're headquartered in Baltimore, we definitely have a culture. It's tangible. It's electric. It's like going to a college campus. And so it may be a little bit different than some of the leaders of my peers here. But when you're interacting with them, and for them to really buy your legal counsel, you need to be a member of the team, right? And how do you develop that trust, especially if you're giving them advice that is not going to be popular, or the way I view my role in leading is, I like to say I'm a facilitator of creativity. How do I get you from A to Z, and how do I help guide you and navigate the hurdles? And it takes, part of it is just a function of time and being in the trenches with people. And when they start to trust you, then you're better able to lead, leverage, show results. And I'm sure I'll get into more sports analogies through this, but really maximize your IP portfolio from an offensive perspective, and then better defend your company from a defensive perspective. So.
Take us into the trenches, since Esther led us there, referencing Chip, who gave a fabulous discussion on the case which Finnegan and Under Armour worked on together. You are the in-house counsel. We heard from the outside counsel's perspective. What were some of your takeaways and leadership lessons from that case?
The Armourina case specifically. I mean, I think, so I also have to caveat, Chip has two names. I call him Doug. He also goes by Chip. It's very confusing. So I'll try to call him Chip. But anyways, brand counsel, yes. Okay, so our general counsel has referred to our trademarks at Under Armour as our crown jewels, right? Patents are also very important. We view ourselves as an innovative company, right? We're trying to be cutting edge, and that's not just from a performance apparel perspective, also ESG, sustainability, what are we doing? So it's just a great place to be an IP practitioner. But Armourina was a luxury in a sense, because as a big company, oftentimes you're batting away the people coming at you, right? Whether it's frivolous claims or viable claims. And so there is a lot of defense played. And Armourina was an instance where we were able to play the offensive. And again, there's always that PR optics, which is outside, I think, of our scope as practitioners. So moving from being an outside counsel coming in-house, your brain is operating kind of differently, where you're thinking, okay, this is the outcome we want. How will that affect our brand? Because again, like I said, we don't view ourselves as a company, we view ourselves as a brand. We buy into it, and we're a company that makes you better, and our perception in the public is very important. And so having Chip, a trusted partner, also this is another thing, when you find an outside counsel that you can go build that relationship with and who has institutional knowledge, they can also kind of share that in-house judgment, risk tolerance assessment, where he was able to lead us and guide us in winning a case that was very difficult. Like, thinking of the number of open matters, it was an incredible win that now gives us a recent win, and strengthens one of our house marks. So that crown jewel, it's incredible. And so thank you, Doug. But
You
it's
know
just
what,
very exciting.
One of the things we always say to our students is, you want to lead the professor by the hand through the problem solving. And by the end of it, say, of course, your answer is correct. And I think when we saw Chip's slides this morning and giving example after example of how the case was strong because the objections were addressed, whether preemptively or in response to briefs, you have a sense that there's that trust, there's that sense of security, not just between client and the law firm, but more importantly, perhaps for your purposes, between the parties and the court. And I think it's always a matter of persuasion, and that persuasion and advocacy really builds on the very human element of trust, which I think you underscored very nicely, and which you demonstrated to the court. You look like you have something to add. Claire. Okay. Ankur? Hold on, Ankur.
Before you
Shah,
say anything.
Associate General Counsel for IP, Freddie Mac.
That's correct. I am at Freddie Mac, Associate General Counsel in charge of IP. And I wanted to, first of all, thank you, Esther, and the organizers for this wonderful conference, for inviting me to participate again. I have had the honor of participating in many of the conferences over the last couple of decades. And I really enjoy it. And I'm always really thrilled to meet the great panelists that you all bring together. And I learn a lot from the panelists, and I'm learning a lot today already. And I really am pleased by how much research you have done into the panelists and are able to talk about, things that they have written about or spoken about. And I'm really kind of curious and also a little bit wary about what you're going to say.
I'll just say for Ankur, he keeps an active face in LinkedIn posts. So you want to find out what's
So
going
there's a lot of material there. That's right.
week to week, go to LinkedIn.
No, but I appreciate the effort that you have put in to getting to know the panelists even before we have arrived. So thank you. And I'm interested in whatever questions you have. I'm curious,
Well,
and then I'm happy to speak about whatever you want.
First of all, I should say the organizers, who shall not be named for the moment, do a fabulous job at getting people who have an interesting perspective and interesting and accomplished lives to come here. So it's an easy thing. I think what we have just heard in the last half hour or so is really both the diversity of the experiences, but also a certain unity in that what leadership looks like. It's about building trust, it's about happiness, it's about understanding the analytics, bringing these different pieces together. Now, the question I have for you is, what is your piece of the puzzle?
So can we shift from pure IP for a moment?
Sure.
Okay, because of course, as an IP attorney, I have all the normal, like what my job is, right? We have, when I joined Freddie Mac, we had 5 patents, right? And so the question was, why don't we have more patents? And so that was sort of my
I
challenge.
thought you were going to shift from IP.
Yeah, but just to say that is really important. I don't
Okay.
mean to say anything other than that, but there have been a lot of challenges associated with that. But I think that there's sort of like normal, right? That you guys kind of figured out what goes into that marketing and promotion and getting it to be part of the DNA, protecting your developments, not just making great technologies, but making sure that early on you bring in IP counsel to help protect it. So all of that's there, and that's where I spend sort of most of my time. But in the last few years, I've really had the opportunity to spend more time focusing on the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our company, and then also what we can do outside of our company to help move the needle in the profession. And it's really a passion of mine. I know it's been, a focus of this conference and a passion of many of the people who attend this conference, but I've never really had the opportunity to take a leadership role in that space up until the last few years. We've always been involved in diversity
Say something
issues.
about that, because that's an important part of your bio, which I think folks here should know, that you are co-chair of something.
Yes, so in our legal division, which we have about 250 employees, roughly 120 or so are lawyers, we have a diversity and inclusion council that's focused on these efforts. And so I co-chair that council. And Freddie Mac, if you don't know, we're a mortgage finance company, regulated. We're under conservatorship since the financial crisis of 2008. But we have an incredible workplace atmosphere. We have a really diverse workforce. I think at the end of 2022, it was 57% of our employees were ethnically diverse, and roughly half are women. So I think we're doing really well from a diversity standpoint from our employee base. And we have similar figures, I think, in the legal division. And I think where we haven't been doing as well, and where some of our efforts are focused, is in making sure that we have a really good pipeline, a diverse pipeline into the leadership ranks. Because while the employee base maybe really diverse. The leadership, both at the corporate level and within the legal division, frankly, is not as diverse. And so that's something that we see in industry. That's something we see at law firms. It's something that we see in our own company. And we spend a lot of time and thought into how we can affect change in that space. And that's something I'm working on right now with our general counsel as well.
Thanks. I'm glad you mentioned that. Izu, why don't you go ahead and then I'll respond to.
I just want to add really quickly before we move off of this point, and that is something that Ankur said and also that Claire said, is thinking about the next generation of attorneys in our field. So one thing that I'm trying to do at JP Morgan is train that next generation. So for me, it was easy to be in this role, which is beyond IP. It has to do with innovation because I have an engineering undergrad background. But I've been able to build a new team of attorneys who aren't IP attorneys or tech attorneys, but they're subject matter experts in what they do. So they may have securities law background or a markets law background or a payments law background. And we've brought them to our team, and now we're teaching them, what does it mean to be an IP attorney? What does innovation mean? What AI laws do you need to know in order to advise our businesses? And if they can understand that, then they become trusted advisors to their business partners. So thinking about not just what we've learned, but also trying to impart that knowledge on others. That way they can grow and also advise our clients.
That's actually a great point. Yeah, Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, it's a great segue just into diversity and inclusion generally. I'm gonna use another anecdote because my dad's a preacher and I like anecdotes and I like parables and I like stories. But
You can,
so
you can quote scripture.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
channel your inner preacher. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I mentioned earlier, where there's happiness, there's innovation. Similarly, where you have inclusion, there's improvement. And I want to take you back just briefly to 1970. There was at the time, a grad student at Berkeley named Uri Treisman. He's now a distinguished professor of mathematics at University of Texas. And Uri was teaching a class, can't remember what class it was, multivariable calculus, linear algebra, something, higher level class at Berkeley. And he's got students, a very diverse student population. And this may be interesting to some of the students at Howard now. And what he noticed in the results, the scores on some of his tests were that his Asian students were consistently performing in the A range, whereas most of his African-American students were performing in the B range. And he started asking questions like why that is. And amongst the faculty, he got some, stereotypical answers, yada, yada, yada. So, but as a researcher inherently, he said, well, let me look and really find out what's going on. So he asked the students, can I follow you around and see how you're studying? And what he discerned was his Asian students were actually studying in groups. His Black students were studying alone. They were isolated. And so he came up with this thing called the Treisman model, where he started requiring in all of his classes that students study together in groups. And what ended up happening was not only did the scores of his Black students rise into the A range, but the scores of all of the students overall rose as well. So how does that apply to the workplace? Well, in our organization, mine and in others, sometimes you get the reputation of being a fast follower, right? You follow the TikToks, you kind of copy what they do. Anytime that you have a fast follower reputation, it's the result of groupthink. It's a result of lack of innovation or creativity.
Can I say footnote C, Microsoft and ChatGPT? Just saying.
So how does inclusion matter? Well, when you have groupthink, you've got people who are typically thinking the same thing. Maybe they ideate together, they solution together, and the teams aren't mixing it up. So it's important, it's incumbent upon us as the folks who are directing prosecution in certain areas to ask the questions, who was a member of this team? Who provided input? Maybe there's another avenue that I want you to think about, and there's a team over here that's doing something else. You guys should probably collaborate together. By creating that crosstalk, by requiring the inclusion, we tend to get better results overall as an organization.
I think that's a critical point that was brought up during the lunchtime presentations, and how diversity not just adds to the importance of the equitable representation, but really better ideas, because you're approaching things from so many different perspectives. Now, back to you, Ankur. I haven't forgotten you.
Sure, no. I love
I,
this.
I was just gonna ask,
Can I add to that
I-
just real quick?
add to that as part of the question,
Okay.
the answer to the question, because it's related. I kind of
Sure.
know what you're gonna add, but I know it's good and I know it's relevant. But let me ask the question first. So you decided that DEI was an important part of your job, not just growing patents and adding IP value to the company. That's where we were in the conversation. Now, walk us through that process, because I think although the rest of them haven't really touched on it in that same perspective, they've touched on it from different angles, and every one of them has some connection to this broader DEI mission, which is why they are here today, but they were doing this way before today,
Right.
including yourself. So walk us through that journey and that thought process.
That's a good question. I'll share some sort of personal aspects that go into that answer. For a long time in my career, I really shied away from focusing on diversity, kind of not acknowledging, that I'm not, whatever, right, middle-aged white male, right? Just that I didn't really focus on that aspect. Didn't want that to be the focus. And I have kids now that, have gone through the college application process. One of them has. And I think back to my childhood, right, being South Asian kid in central Pennsylvania, middle of, like very, very white, very homogeneous part of the world, the only, non-white kid in the high school, and, helping to run a motel and all this stuff, which I think about now as a missed opportunity because, I'm not complaining about the childhood, great upbringing, but it has a lot of challenges, right? And those are the obvious ones, and we don't need to explain those here. But what I didn't do is talk about it. I look back and what did I say about just how I'm just like this normal person who does these normal activities, and here are my grades and here are my scores, and don't even think about me being anything other than normal white America person. And I think that was such a missed opportunity because I had so many interesting stories to say about what my path was to that point, and certainly to this point in my life, that I was purposely, not putting a spotlight on. And that would have shown the differences, right? The differences that can actually benefit a team, the different experiences in life that we bring to the table that can make better decisions, that can make your company more profitable. My company has a public mission, and a lot of us, sort of buy into that, and that is a large reason why we're there, to help make sure that there's funding available for people who want to get into homes and buy homes. But even if and so, we're not just all about how much money we can make. There's a mission to it. But even if your company doesn't have that, or if your law firm doesn't have that as a public mission, right? It still makes sense to have a diverse leadership team because you're going to make better decisions, and studies have shown that you're going to be more profitable. And so, you want to bring people in who have different life experiences. And so I thought, why don't I try to do that? We talk about it, Freddie Mac now, what brought everyone had a different path to take to come to the table here. What was your path? What was your life experience? How do you view things perhaps differently than I view them that will make our team better? And we actually actively talk about it instead of ignore it. So that's sort of what
Thank
we
you.
wanted me to bring.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, that was such a powerful answer. Now, this is a question to the whole group. Are we at an inflection point in this country's history? We are all talking about DEI. What Esther and Latif had started 20 years ago is now everywhere, and people are clamoring onto this bandwagon. Is it a fad, or is this here to stay? And if there's any doubt at all in any one of your companies that this is a fad, or there's risk of it being a fad, what are you doing in your leadership positions to make sure that as an institution, you are going to be able to keep the strengths that you are experiencing, the gains that you have enjoyed going into the future and after you are gone from your position?
So I'll start. I definitely, I've been with 3M for a long time, as Daryl says, and I've seen the company change so much in terms of its openness to DE&I. It's not a fad, you know, it's definitely here to stay. It just seems like the pace of change is like molasses in a cold winter Minnesota morning. That's how it feels like at times. But it's moving forward in the right direction. We all want it to move faster. And one of the things that the company that I work with is doing to try and keep it that way is kind of controversial, but it's the concept of working your way. It's the concept of we hire a lot of our attorneys don't live in Minnesota. I know Minnesota is a bastion of beauty and warm weather, but we have been able to hire really very diverse, not only in gender, but in, LGBTQ. And we've been able to hire people with veterans that we would have never been able to hire had we required them to be in Minnesota. So that's one thing that we're all trying to get. It's very different change, right? We're not in the office trying to get used to, but I think the company is looking for different ways, more creative ways to try and make sure that we have a diverse workforce. And to counterbalance that, since so many of us are no longer in the mothership of the Twin Cities, Minnesota, we try to like really intentionally have these, what we call anchor days, or days where we can get together once. It's really hard. I'm not saying it's easy by any means, but we're trying to balance having the benefit of a diverse workforce with making sure people feel connected and included. And the worry for me as a leader is, okay, we can hire these great, very diverse perspective attorneys, but how do we keep them? What is the inclusion factor? How do we keep that in? Diversity is just the start, right? It's the inclusion that is allowing our diverse employees to be retained and to stay. And that, I think, is a hard nut to crack. And I would love, we're trying many different things to up the game on inclusion, but it's not an easy challenge.
Thanks for being so honest and vulnerable about that. I think that's a sign of leadership, the fact that you know that you don't have it all, you don't have all the answers. I know there's somebody else that wanted to say something, but before, I just want to flag that after that, I'm going to take questions or comments from the audience, just so that we have a chance to actually have a chat both ways. So Claire, go ahead.
Sure. I think the way I would break it down is my company has efforts, and then the legal department, there's additional challenges because you require an advanced degree, and then IP field, additional challenges, and then the patent bar, as we saw earlier today, right? And so being creative and having a very tough skin about, and leadership changes, right? So you may have a leader who's advancing it, pushing hard, they retire or they leave, and then you take a step back and have to so the persuasiveness of DE&I, and I also heard recently DE&IJ is DE&I and justice, right? So I think it's not a fad. I think that also with this, what is the latest generation that's entering our workforce now? Yeah, where they're very impatient with change. So, I mean, it's just, and I think each one, no offense, y'all. But I think that I'm a millennial. I get enough crap, so I feel like I could say it. But with each new generation, there's a growing, the younger generations aren't going to let us just become complacent, I think. So that's why I don't think it's a fad. And I think that our leaders are holding up mirrors now. So there's this energy, there's a movement. But thinking creatively. If you have hiring freezes, how do you increase? Okay, so maybe we can't increase the diversity of our legal department right now. But focusing on that pipeline, what can we do? And I think Judge Braden earlier was saying, I can't change the world, but I can do things individually. And so that's kind of been our legal department approach. We also started a program 2 years ago, an initiative where we're working on increasing the diversity of our outside counsel representation. And ultimately, like the long-term plan is to, when we look at our outside counsel, they're all as aligned as we are as a company, a legal department, but that you can't change overnight, right? But what are you doing? So it's like it's a friendly, but also no excuse approach, right? So you may not be able to change your statistics within the next year,
Yeah.
but you can put more effort, have more attorneys within your department, speaking at conferences, reaching out, affecting one student's life at a time. And we're actually seeing in the 2 years since we've started this initiative, really impressive changes just from the soft but firm requests, conversations we've had. So that's very encouraging, I think.
Great, Ankur. And then Izu first.
So I think it's not a fad, and I think it's very important, and I think that companies understand that, and people, generally speaking, agree with it, or at least understand it. But I think it's important to acknowledge and recognize that there is sort of some pushback, right? In the D&I efforts that we all are sort of
Yeah,
seeing.
who is
and-
pushing back?
I mean, you,
Everybody? Oh dear.
I don't want to get into the politics of it, but you have to acknowledge it, right? It's not universally accepted that these efforts are all, positive for society. And so you can't ignore that, right? If you ignore it, then you're missing a whole segment of your employee population or the population as a whole, right? That may not be on board, that you would really need to be on board for this to work properly. And so there's no silver bullet, but I think you do need to, when you, and we think about this too, and any efforts that you make, you kind of want to raise, it should be a rising tide. It shouldn't just be at least very narrowly focused on your diverse talent, but you should be offering programs for the development of all of your attorneys, right? And then to the extent that certain attorneys need other opportunities, like going to conferences or affinity bar association involvement, you do that, but you want to make sure that you don't get into a situation where people who are not diverse feel like they're not your allies anymore, because you're getting all the focus because their D&I is important now, and then they're getting left behind. Right? That's not the goal. No one's trying to leave people behind. We're trying to make sure everyone's on a level playing field.
And is that message both getting through and being believed by the other side, whoever the other side might be?
That's up in the air, right? I don't know that. Yeah, that's the sort of the challenge that we're all facing.
All right, thanks. Izu, and then I want to give time for folks for
Really
questions.
quickly,
and
I was going to say, is this being recorded? But I think it is. I'm hopeful that it's not a fad, but I think the numbers will tell you. I know you can't only rely on numbers, but I think the numbers are truthful and do not lie. So looking at the number of diverse people in this field, not only in the legal field, but the data scientists and those who are creating the IP will tell you if this is going to be a fad, that we'll see the numbers trend down or just stay stagnant, or if the numbers will increase. But I know one thing differently that I'm trying to do is, one of my main clients is the chief data officer for the investment bank at JP Morgan, and they have their own DE&I initiative. And so I'm looking at what they're doing and joining their efforts as their attorney on that side, so hopefully get more diverse data scientists of color, women in the field.
Thanks. And for folks in this room, whether you are from company or whether you are at a law firm, are you getting a sense that there's an expectation as a service provider or to provide service to you as a client, that there needs to be a displayed commitment to DEI? I certainly hope, at least in Finnegan, the answer is yes, because you have a chief diversity officer. Questions or comments for the audience? Yeah. Do they need to come to the mic, Esther? Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha Wallen Robinson, counsel at Splunk. And my question is, recently on LinkedIn, there was a graphic that the number of DEI officers has actually gone down since 2020, and some of the promises made in that regard by some companies has actually been recanted or different. So can you tell me about your thoughts on that? And again, in your capacities, how you will try to help overcome some of the setbacks we're seeing now with the DEI officers that we did have that no longer are here.
Thanks. Great question. Response?
You're looking at me like I have a response.
You looked at me first, Andy. I was just being
Um,
polite.
The question is still generally on the topic of whether or not the pendulum is swinging. And I think to Ankur's point, there is some evidence of that. And what you just cited is proof positive that there is a pendulum swinging. Just to put this in historical context and to sound a note of hope. In the US Constitution, you don't have to get too many words in before you read that the context of this entire experiment is to establish justice and to ensure domestic tranquility, happiness, peace, things like that. And since this is an IP and social justice conference, it's also interesting that just a few hundred words later in Article 1, Section 8 is the constitutional basis for what we all do in practicing patent law. And I like to remind my wife, who's a med mal lawyer, that what I do is in the Constitution. But the founding fathers could have written, only white male landowners shall be issued letters, patents from the United States. But they didn't, because there was some inherent understanding, even at that time, that regardless of the source of the innovation, it benefits the general welfare for all of us. And so there's this beautiful historical arc between the context set up by the Constitution and the operative language of it. And so despite the present day pendulum swinging back and forth, we can be confident to know that what we do is part of that general theme that we're improving the welfare of our society and that we all have a stake in it. So operationally, what that means for us is, and I was somewhat upstaged by the prior panel. At Meta, we're doing things like the ADAPT program, like the PPP program with my colleague Braxton Davis, who's also in Atlanta with me. One of the programs that we didn't mention is our diverse inventor initiative, where it's just an internal focus on identifying who's innovating, who's not innovating, and then engaging those people who have not been in the innovation pipeline. So being very specific about, okay, we've got 45 people on this engineering team, 15 of them are women, none of them have patents. Let's proactively go to each one of them, sit down and talk about what have you been thinking about the last couple of years. Let's put you along the path of innovating and becoming that named inventor. And so those are kind of the things that we can do actively, even though we may be seeing, some states pass laws against ESG. We might see, diversity officers starting to lose their roles. We do sit in some ways insulated from some of that because they can't make the decisions for us. So we've got to do what we can do on the front lines to make sure that we don't take steps back.
Thanks, Andy. And I should say also, maybe subconsciously, I remembered I haven't formally introduced you. Andy Cooper, Associate General Counsel, Meta. You talked about signal boosting to kind of bring this a full circle to the interview that you gave to Corporate Counsel. And I think you alluded to a little bit of signal boosting early on. You also talked about the importance of mentorship. And one individual that you mentioned was Denise Fulmer. Share a bit about that and with both the panel and with the rest of us here on how we can think about in those two areas, signal boosting and mentorship, to really lock in the gains that we have seen in recent decades.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Denise Fulmer was just a legendary lawyer at Coca-Cola, Nike, and Hershey. She passed in 2020. Was my mentor since I was a Coca-Cola extern in law school, and really followed my career. And when I lost her, I lost really kind of this central figure that was kind of directing my life for many years. But as she was a Black woman in Atlanta, and one of the things that she always said to me was, make sure that, well, one, you blossom wherever you're planted, but two, that you're helping other people along the way. And so part of the way that I try to do that, to do justice to or pay homage to her legacy, is to never stop mentoring. No matter how how high you go up in an organization, how time consuming, always being willing to answer the phone for the law student, the 1L, as well as, someone who can give you business. And then two, to make sure that as you're developing kind of the folks that are along with you on your journey, that you are helping to point them to others who can be helped by them. So I've got a LinkedIn following of about 50,000 followers, and I try as much as possible to signal boost communities and people who are often unheard and who tend to be in underrepresented groups, just like my mentor did for me, how she poured into me. And that's a responsibility I think that we all have, and something that's it's low-hanging fruit, something we can all do.
Thanks. I should talk to you about how to get 50,000 followers, man. You are lit, as they say. Izu, you didn't want the first word. Do you want the last word? Sure. Okay, go ahead.
So on mentoring or on anything?
Anything.
Okay.
Just give us your pearls of wisdom.
Pearls of wisdom.
Close us off.
Sure. So a couple of things that I can think of, like you said, reaching across the table, first also to your colleagues in-house. I think one thing that I really like in the position that I sit in is that when I see a problem in the tech space or IP space, I know it's going to repeat itself. I then share the knowledge with my other attorneys who are in my area of the other lines of businesses. And what that does, it helps cut down time on them having to learn and their businesses having to make mistakes. So information sharing, I think, is great. Mentorship is also wonderful. Mentoring down and up for me, I think is important in-house. And also last thing is building those relationships. Because without relationships in-house, you will not go anywhere, I'd say.
Great. Izu, Claire, Andy, Yen, Ankur, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. And thank you, Esther. Thank you, Daryl.
Daryl, when I asked you, would you come and moderate this panel? The only thing I gave him was the title of the proposed panel. And he said, that's a great title. But what he did, he breathed life and meaning into this beyond what I imagined when I invited him. So thank you for your extraordinary job in engagement and dialogue. All of you have touched on the theme of uplifting others through IP and intentional focus on DEI and making that part of your narrative. And you're all doing that in different ways in your respective organizations, but with a common goal of doing good. Chip, can you come up here? I invite you to come up to the. I'll tell you momentarily. Chip and I started at the firm the same year. We're first-year associates, 1995. So we go back many years. And he's in the trademark group, and I'm in the patent group. He has been coming to the Howard IP conference every year that I've invited him, so over 10 years. And he delivers this spectacular trademark year in review. It was only a couple weeks ago when we started following up and collaborating with one of our valued clients, Under Armour, in creating this new program to uplift diverse law students, particularly at HBCUs, to create a Finnegan Under Armour law student diverse summer internship. And Claire has been spearheading it internally to make that possible. And we've been collaborating and interviewing 3 superb candidates from Howard Law School to do that. Chip has participated in all of those interviews with me and interviewing the students. And during those 3 interview sessions, I learned more about Chip than I had in the last 27 years. Come closer, I'm not gonna hit you.
I forgot what we said during the interview. What happened?
So look at us. I found that he's also a first-generation lawyer. He had to work through high school, college, and law school to pay for tuition. Very similar experiences that I've had. I never knew that we had those things in common. And it was during those interviews that I also realized, oh, apparently he's a white male. He's Italian from New Jersey, and I'm from a beach town in South Korea. And we shared more commonalities, which were discovered precisely because we were focused on identifying talented law students for this unique opportunity to give them a boost up as they enter the legal profession. And so, as Maya Angelou says, we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. And I'm realizing that about my partner and our other allies around us who are willing to grow with us, to support us, to help us, to collaborate. And so I wanted to end on the positive note of allyship and how important it is across demographics, across all groups, that together we can do good. Thank you.
That was good. Esther didn't add that there was the young group of people at Finnegan who were interviewing, and we were the old group of people who were interviewing. So we share that in common too. So that was, we have that special. But thank you. I'll say real quick, it's just such a pleasure. I mean, Esther and I have been here since '95, and she's become such a good friend. And so it's true though, during that interview, we did have a lot more commonalities. And you learned I was a bartender too, which is why you've been nice to me now.
Thank you.